Cool. Hey, everybody. Excited to kick off our next portfolio thesis interview. I'm here with the founder of Max Space, Aaron Kemmer. I'm going to share a high level thesis on what Max Space is and why we chose to invest. And then we're going to dive a lot more into it as we go. Aaron and I have now known each other for a few years. VU is actually, I think, the only or one of the only VC investors in his previous company called Made in Space. Which did 3D printing in space from the very small to the very large. And after having a successful exit with that company, Aaron followed up with us and said, hey, we're going to looking to launch this new company, Max Space, which is looking to create the most real estate in space at the lowest cost that you could possibly do. And initially, when Aaron brought that up, if it wasn't for Aaron's background, that concept's a pretty big concept of building a large amount of real estate at a lowest cost in space. But part of what led us into the thesis on doing the investment was that there's very few people on Earth that have successfully exited a space company, that have had multiple missions to space, and have one of the best networks in space to create the next generation of the future of where space is going. And so all of that was very much a back of the founder. And then the other part that we're going to dive into more is around the capital efficiency. VU now has a space portfolio company of roughly 10 companies. About 10% of our portfolio is space tech. And what we have found is that a large number of them have this hyper capital efficiency to them, which is really a transformative aspect of the industry, which was once one very big CapEx, but has come down dramatically to allow for brand new opportunities like Made in Space, like Max Space. And so very excited to welcome Aaron to doing the interview. So thank you, Aaron, for doing this. Maybe just to kick things off, share a little bit maybe about your background with Made in Space and then getting into Max Space, because Made in Space was a quite extraordinary story. I remember even when we made our initial investment in Made in Space, the company had been around for about a decade, had raised maybe $2-3 million, and was on track to doing tens of millions of dollars. Was
like
a huge amount of cash on the balance sheet. And so very rare to find a company that has been around that long in the space industry, doing that much in revenue, EBITDA positive, with raising very little in capital. And now kind of what inspired you to now launch Max Space.
Yeah, Sky, thanks for having me. And yeah, good to have you on board, not only in my first space company, but now Max Space, as well. Yeah, the way we started with Made in Space was to make it very capital efficient in mind. I think part of it was because 2010, when we started the company, there wasn't a lot of space startups. Actually, the saying back then was, how do you become a millionaire in space? You start out as a billionaire. It's kind of where you go to not to make money, but to kind of spend your money. It's kind of a vanity project at the time. I think there was maybe a dozen space startups. There was like what I like to call like your cohort zero space startups, like SpaceX, Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic. And then that kind of eventually led to, cohort one, I like to say, maybe it's actually cohort 1 and 2, but, like Planet Labs, Made in Space, several others, Planetary Resources, Satellogic, that started in 2010, 2011 kind of time frame. And it was a really successful company, Made in Space. I like to name companies what they are. So Made in Space, we make things in space, and Max Space, we give you the maximum amount of space in space. So pretty direct. We essentially did the first in space manufacturing. We were working with NASA Marshall Space Flight Center. And they, contracted us to build the first 3D printer, which built the first kind of parts in space. And then from there, we did not only 3D printing, and we 3D printed hundreds of parts for astronauts, fixes for the space station. I think the best fix was when NASA needed a fixed part for the solar array panel, and they gave us a call, and it was that kind of Apollo 13 moment we'd been waiting for in the history of the company. But then outside of that, we also manufactured many other things like ZBLAN. Like we made the first ZBLAN ever made in space, and a lot of other things like turbine materials. And We were looking at biological materials, pharmaceuticals, really kind of a swath of things.
I remember it
And
was on the Made in Space side, by the way. I remember when, just to share even like the thesis for why we invested in Made in Space before even Max Space, was the versatility of what you were capable of doing in becoming now the category leader in manufacturing in space, from everything as small as like a screw. Like if you forgot a screw, you need an extra screw, you could print it, but you could also print something that was effectively continuous to build something that in the future is larger than what you could even print on Earth. If you really want to print something
exactly,
super
yeah,
massive, you had the
like
capability of
kilometers
doing
long.
something from
Yeah.
the small to infinitely long. And I remember one of the things that you guys were planning on building was the basically you could do a shaft for building out the infrastructure for even building out additional space
Okay.
stations, as well as having satellites that basically you might have the brain of the satellite there, but then the printers attached to it, and it basically prints the satellite around itself afterwards. So was really fascinating what you had built and Made in Space is that there was just the versatility of what you could build, and you were the category leader in being able to have, I think at that time, maybe 7 or 8 printers in space, both on the International Space Station and not. So pretty impressive play, and also the versatility of what you could even print, from plastics to like metals. I think going all the way up to titanium was just really extraordinary and obviously it ended up proving to be a great outcome of a private equity firm buying it and also having it as part of a larger play overall that you then got to be on the board of.
Yeah, and it ended up being bought by Aero Equity, which is big in the, I think that was their first forte into space, and now they're a much bigger player in space, and great group of guys there. I think for us, one of the most exciting future markets for in space manufacturing was producing things for down here on Earth, like ZBLAN. And one of the big limiters we had, and which just led to Max Space, and actually part of the reason we ended up selling, is we were just we kept getting bottlenecked on having real estate in space. We were very limited kind of in 3 areas. So number 1 was real estate. Number 2 was crew time. Everything required expensive astronauts. I think the latest numbers was like $100,000 an hour for an astronaut time. And
Wow.
then the ability to get things down, from the station. And so, but it always started at that real estate, just not having enough volume to do rapid scaled manufacturing. And I think this is important because, I think if you're actually going, so in many ways, in space manufacturing is kind of where, the light bulb was before, Thomas Edison and others really kind of, found out how to, make a light bulb. And you need to do essentially thousands of experiments across many different types of materials to find out really what works and what can be scaled. Like we made ZBLAN, but it wasn't like production quality and it couldn't be scaled. But it was good enough to show, okay, this does live up to the hype of like, being potentially the highest attenuation.
Yeah, Z-Plan is interesting in that it's from a choice of material. It has like one of the highest revenue per gram. So if you're looking
Exactly.
for like what's some of the best things you could, print in space and create space to Earth products, Z-Plan is right up there as one of the top things you can do by revenue per gram.
Exactly. But ZBLAN, as well with the several other materials we played with, we always just kept running into that real estate problem. And so when I looked at it at the time, I was like, we're probably at least 5 years, maybe a decade away from being able to do any real, scaled production. And it's, as you kind of pointed out, like Made in Space didn't really raise a lot of money. We didn't need to. Our ethos was always, look, if you're going to work in space, you need to learn how to work with NASA, the government, and kind of others. And if you can't really figure that out, then you shouldn't have a space company. And so that kind of like worked out well for us, to the point where the company got bigger and bigger, and it seemed like at the time that it could be in a healthier spot with Aero Equity, because we got to a pretty big size. I think it was close to 50 million in revenue a year, at the end of closing.
Again, if you think about that from even a non-space company, for a company to raise only $2 to $3 million, and get to 50 million plus in revenue, and
Yep.
being, very EBITDA positive to be able to do
Yeah.
that. That is like, that would have been exceptional for a non-space company. Doing that for a space tech company is truly exceptional.
Yeah, and it was great. And I think I like those businesses. I always get scared of businesses that you can't iterate, that you need. Whenever I see company raises X billion dollars to launch a product, I'm like, oh God. To launch a product, that's a lot of money. One of the companies that I really hope they'll end up pulling through, because I hear they're still kind of out there, but they had such an amazing, beautiful vision, was like Magic Leap,
Oh,
the
sure. Yeah,
AR,
Magic Leap. Yep.
the AR company. And maybe that vision now will come to life with the Apple Vision Pro. I've heard that's pretty beautiful. But usually, like, it's like that those kind of businesses, like thinking of like an investor hat, those scare me, the ones that need
Yeah,
need
yeah,
the
we've historically passed on those companies like Quibi, which is trying to create a large amount of short form content. They raised about $1 billion in the process of launching these
yeah.
like 7 minute, 15-minute episodes, and then it went out of business. And so
Yeah. Yeah, it's yeah. I think it's because it's easier to, uh, I don't want to say fake it, but it's easier to uh have a grand vision without launching in the market. You really need to launch, and we'll talk more about this later. You really need to launch and just, kind of see if the hypothesis, has is accepted in kind of reality. And I do think that going back to the real limiters that we saw on the space station cost, estimated at $100 billion, 60 launches, and we got 1,000 cubic meters of usable volume, and that's not a lot. I mean, even if you use the entire ISS, I mean, you might be able to do like 1,000 experiments for in-space manufacturing. That's just one market, right? That's not talking about the, tourism market, the entertainment market, the, sports in space market, the other national interests, all the other things that you'd want to do with volume
because
science.
you basically have two options. It's like you can keep on trying to add on additional space onto the International Space Station, and then you have the other option, which is we need to build new space completely separate from the International Space Station. And so whether that's like a second, third, fourth International Space Station, whether you do private International Space Stations, but the whole challenge there is, how do you actually, to your point, create a lot more space at a significantly lower cost? Not that it won't cost 100 billion. And you had a pretty interesting, I guess, connection to being able to reduce the risk and the cost with how to do that. I guess go back to the beginnings of your other co-founder, in accessing a technology that was actually developed, I don't know, 1 or 2 decades ago now, roughly.
Yeah,
Prior to the reducing the cost of getting to space. But now that we've had a significant reduce in the cost of space, going from, I think the initial space shuttle was like $85,000, per kilogram, down to now, I think the most recent one where we had two of our space portfolio companies actually on the same SpaceX rocket went up for like going $5,400 a kilogram. And then I
I
guess
think, yeah,
going
they want to
even
get down to
further,
100.
yeah,
Yeah, they
so
want
we
to.
get down to like $100 with
Mhm.
with Starship, $100 a kilogram, which is just a small number, multiples bigger than shipping something around the United States or to the world. And so it starts getting quite competitive as the price keeps on coming down. You can now keep on sending people and other things up, but you need a way to
Any place
create
to
a
go.
lot of space in a low cost way. And so maybe share with kind of the breakthrough that you ended up coming up with your co-founder, who really you're on the backs of a lot of money and time, resources that have gone into trying to figure out all these different ways in the past, but now doing it in a time where it's a lot more economically feasible to get something up there.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah, exactly. And so this kind of company was very, like top down driven in a lot of ways. So it's like, okay, as you said, launch is getting cheaper, and it's going to get cheaper and cheaper, right? If you believe SpaceX, it's going to get to 100 or even less. And you've got over 100 VC backed companies that are also trying to compete with SpaceX. Are all of them going to make it? No. But if you look at like other booms like the internet boom and the railroad boom and et cetera. Like you'll see a few of these companies really turn into really successful missions where launch will probably get commoditized. But then you get to a point where you just, even if with it commoditized, you have no place to kind of go. And you start to see this, like the tourism market, it's what I think it's Paul Graham who calls them like larval markets, like these markets that aren't quite mature, actually just like almost like baby markets, but starting to grow. Like space tourism, I think is one of those where people would fly to space maybe a couple times a decade, the last 25-ish years. Space Adventures was one of the big companies that kind of spearheaded that. And then now it's, up to, then it gets to the point every couple years, and then every year, and then now maybe like a half a dozen or so people a year going to actual space. And then there was this one recent, Inspiration 4 mission that they had to fly on a SpaceX Dragon capsule, but they, we're just stuck in the capsule. It's like 9.7 cubic meters. It's like maybe the size of a bathroom or slightly bigger. So 4 people in there for like 3 or 4 days. I mean, that's not a lot of space. And it's just, again, because that space is really, 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 really kind of the limiter. And so anybody deep in the space industry, they know that space expandable habitats or inflatable habitats. I like to use the word expandable because I think inflatable makes them sound weaker than they are, but they're actually really strong. They're actually stronger than your rigid modules. It's not like a, inflatable mattress where, you're gonna worry about it popping it. It's made out of several materials, one of them being Kevlar, another one being Vectran, which is like a flexible Kevlar, and it's 10 times stronger than aluminum in terms of specific strength. It has multiple layering, but anybody that's in the industry, they've heard about inflatables from a company called Bigelow Aerospace. And Robert Bigelow is kind of really the pioneer of space inflatable habitats, having launched 2, Genesis 1 and 2, about 20 years ago. It was on the backs of NASA's Transhab program. So he bought the IP from that and then launched 2 of them. And so I knew, thinking about real estate in space, I'm like, okay, inflatable seems like something, it's like one of these technologies that you can get orders of magnitude improvement, both in terms of volume, right? So right now, if you launch like a rigid hard module, it's like launching like a Pepsi can. You can only get like the size that you launch, right? Versus, if you launch an inflatable, you can, expand 10x, 20x. Our current system, you can theoretically get up to 50x, right?
Wow.
So that means let's say like our first one, it's going to be 2 cubic meters packed. Then it's going to expand up to 20 cubic meters. So that's a 10.
I remember that when we made our initial investment in Max Space, I remember 20x. I didn't know they could go all the way up to 50x. That's impressive.
Yeah.
From like a pushing the bounds.
Pushing the bounds. Yes, the 20x one will be like our first, like probably real product, which is a 100 cubic meter module. They'll pack inside 5 cubic meters and then expand up to 100. The 100 cubic meters is roughly the size of a lot of the modules, on the ISS. It's like a good, average kind of number. But instead of sending up 100 cubic meters, which is the current state of the art, you send up 5. So you can send up 20 modules for the size of one. But
I
not
guess what's
only do
also
you
great
have,
about the module, the expandables too, is that you have the ability of not just manufacturing individual expandables that are bigger and bigger over time, but you can also connect expandables to expandables, and effectively really creating no limit to the amount of space that you could create with that model. They kind of all become almost like Lego pieces. So whether you're looking to create a lab or you're looking to create a space hotel, or even a large stadium, like you have the ability of lots of different options of what you can create in space and size,
exactly.
which is very fascinating. And it's also utilizing a technology, again, that you mentioned, that has been proven during a time when it was a lot more expensive to get to space. And now bring something back where the cost is a lot lower, where the amount of things that we're sending to space, I think like in this 2023, we'll probably have like more things sent to space than like all of the time that we've been sending things to space that are going up there. So it is incredible when you think of the
it's an exponential space,
yeah,
pun intended.
literally. And you think about the variety of things of what you can use max space for. So again, on Earth, we've done one of the fun things we like to do as a VC fund is every quarter we play this game of what is the largest possible market size that we could invest in. And fun factoid, on Earth, the largest asset on Earth as a business is real estate. It's about $250 trillion in asset value of real estate. And so one of the things that got us excited about max space was effectively you're creating what is, if it's the biggest, biggest asset on Earth, if you could replicate that, and there's even more space, outside of Earth and space, the upside of how big of a company could create by creating the real estate, managing the real estate is pretty phenomenal. And especially when you think of the spectrum of what it can be used for, from labs to space tourism, to government, to enterprise. It's pretty much everything that you use real estate for on Earth can be done in space.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's kind of how I think about, the company and what we're trying to do, which is, our KPIs or OKRs, our key metrics, have you will, is we want to have the most real estate in space. We want to have the most cubic meters in like 10 years. If you look ahead of usable real estate by, not just by NASA and DoD and national interest, but by tourists and entertainment. You mentioned, arenas, having the most usable real estate kind of up there, being inside max space modules. And so yeah, just taking it back to how I met my co-founder, it was really interesting because I was like, okay, inflatables is I really believe was a core technology. And I believe Bigelow Aerospace was onto something, and I just think the timing was off, like 20 years early. Like, unfortunately, when they launched, there wasn't enough launch vehicles, and it really wasn't until like the last like 5 or so years where we really get this consistency. It hasn't been that long that we've been flying humans back up on SpaceX. We were really dependent on. Even to go to the ISS, for the US to fly, they had to fly through Russia on the Soyuz capsule. And all space tourists that went up for, many years was on the Soyuz capsule. And so it's really just starting to, kind of change now, which is like 20 years later. And I started doing digging around the inflatable industry. Bigelow Aerospace, kind of unfortunately, just I think due to timing, kind of closed their doors. But what I found out was this guy named Maxim. He designed and built the inflatable pressure shells, the soft goods that make the inflatable work, both for Genesis 1 and 2, and then designed Beam as well. And I like to think of him like, once I met him and really kind of, dived into his last 20 years of work, he's been working exclusively on space inflatables. And I think of him as like the godfather of this kind of space inflatable industry, almost a Warner von Braun of like space inflatables, which is a really tall, like,
There's also not that many people on Earth that have that specialization of space habitats like he does.
Yeah, exactly. And so I was like, hey, I think we should, my experience is like a entrepreneur creating, space companies. I'm very good at like program management and making and tying everything together to kind of make missions happen. And his experience with space inflatables, let's create this company. And we said, hey, let's go for it. And plan is to launch our first inflatable module within the next 2 years and be a prototype, a scaled down prototype of our first product, which will be that 100 cubic meter, module.
You think about by having him as your partner too for this, you're taking two individuals that have pretty amazing expertise, one in manufacturing in space and one in space habitats in space. Mm-hmm. And you've reduced the risk, obviously, by your own backgrounds. Like, you've personally had multiple missions to space. You've exited a space company.
And him as well. So, yeah, we both have.
Him as well. So you both have. Yeah. There's not that many people, again, on Earth that have actually done that in space. So you take that expertise and you're de-risking it because you've already had lots of time and money invested into the inflatable space. And so again, when you think about capital efficiency, that's one of the ways you're able to kind of jumpstart this and be way ahead than if you had to build it from scratch. and figure all this stuff out from scratch, which is now enabling you to kind of do the seed round, with a relatively small amount of money, be able to do this first, pilot test into space. So share a
Yeah.
little bit more about that, kind of the capital efficiency aspect of MaxSpace.
Yeah, I mean, and the first pilot test is pretty cheap. I mean, it's a few $1 million, which we raised for the seed, and pretty much have that covered for the flight unit of that first inflatable module. It'll be the largest inflatable module to go to space, and again, the last module attached to the ISS was Beam, which was inflated, which Max kind of played a hand in designing. But yeah, so it's really efficient. So we'll take that seed round and build the flight unit. We already have the ground unit being finished here over the next couple of weeks. I was the first investor. I wrote the first check to kind of get the ball rolling and to build that. And then we'll start building the flight unit and the MMOD shielding, the micrometeorite impact shielding that you need to kind of protect the habitat for that.
And from a business model perspective, I know one thing that got us really excited about what you were doing is you had kind of two options of, build the real estate and sell it, and you kind of had build the real estate and manage it. When you think about the different type of customers that are going to be using this, can you share some of the examples of who do you think are going to be the first users of the real estate?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, definitely. I think there's a few different types of ways you can kind of look at this question. It's like, who are the end users going to be? And then who maybe the partners that will kind of partner with to help reach those end users. I'll talk about the end users right now, but I definitely think there's a lot of players in the industry that we're partnering with already, and we will be partnering with to reach these end users. But so there's the obvious, the first biggest user of stations in the Western world, at least, is going to be NASA, right? They've made it clear. I think the current target date is like 2030. They'd like to go faster, if they could. They want to transition LEO, or low Earth orbit, away from the government managing it, and they being more of a program manager, kind of how they are with launch, right? They with SpaceX being their main contractor, but not their only one, on getting to the station. So again, they spent like $100 billion, 60 launches to get the first station up. They want commercial stations. They want multiple players. They see the value in that for science, for national interest, for research, for collaboration, and they want to keep that going, but they want to switch that to kind of commercial sets. So I think that's when I often think of like goals or larval markets, like this one is like, okay, that's like the baseline, maybe the bronze, area of where it could become. And then on the gold side, I think you'll see as things like space tourism kind of grows. I definitely think, if I don't know if the exponentials will keep trending out, but it's a hugely exponential market. I think it's gonna hit close to $1 billion either this year or next, from nothing, or virtually nothing. And as launch gets cheaper, that market's going to grow, right? Like right now,
it was interesting. I remember, this is an interesting aside, when we were making the final decision to invest in MaxSpace, I had a really interesting experience that kind of helped build the conviction even further, which is humans have had this interesting aspect to them where they go to like the highest points they can, and then build things there. And I did this trip to my first trip to Hong Kong. I took this electric train at a very steep angle all the way to this top of called the Peaks, where you have the best view of Hong Kong.
I took that train as well. That's a great
amazing experience.
Yeah.
And it was interesting. Like I didn't know, I thought I was just going there to see a good view. Just like if you go to space, you want to kind of look back at Earth and be like, oh, there's Earth. But there's only like so much you can do if you're just going up there to see Earth. And same thing, if you go all the way to the peaks and you see Hong Kong City, it's like, what do you do when you get up there? And Hong Kong has built these like two massive mall buildings at the top of the mountain. So you have something to do. You can eat, you can shop, you can have experiences. And that's a very natural thing for humans to do, is that you go to like the highest point you can, and then you build stuff to make it even a bigger attraction that produces a good amount of revenue. And so when I came back from that trip, I was like, I think what Aaron's doing for Max Space is really something of the future of whether it's space tourism, other consumer applications, enterprise applications, government. There is this need for significant space, but you need to do it at a low cost to really be able to commercialize it at scale. And I remember when we were looking at all the different options that were out there, like how do you create space and space at a low cost? As you mentioned, there's like the tin can approach, and then there's an expandable approach. There really isn't like the spectrum of like how many other ways you can create a large amount of usable space in space. You get to kind of some limited options. And when we were looking into the world of what does the future of space look like, given that we have 10 or so portfolio companies, we tend to have a decent perspective on where space is going as industry, and all of what you would think would be direct competitors of Max Space, where you have companies that are saying, we're going to launch our own international space station, or we're going to create our own space in space. What was interesting is all the ones that we looked at are pretty much all using you as either a partner or a customer into doing that. And so I guess in the spectrum of what's out there, how do you think about, I guess, what other options are there other than this, and how will that kind of evolve? Is it basically going to be expandables that, right now you can go 10 to 20x, soon 50x, maybe in the future you push 100x? What are the different ways that this is going to evolve? And in terms of the competitive landscape, people may be aware of other people making space stations, but it's fascinating to learn that they're actually using you to build the space on their international space station.
Yeah, exactly. I think I've worked in a lot of industries, and space is my favorite because I actually don't think there's any such thing as a true one-to-one competitor. Just look at the International Space Station. Our number one partner on there, the United States number one partner is Russia, right?
Yeah.
We're kind of in like a pretty bad Cold War-ish right now, depending who you ask, with the conflict in Ukraine and everything. But still, we use space as a way to like almost go beyond the
Earth
current
issues.
Earth issues, and think bigger. And I think the same thing is true, like, every space entrepreneur I've met, every company I've kind of talked to, it's the first question isn't like, how do I destroy you as a competitor, but it's like, how can we work together and make each other win?
Yep.
And I really believe that. Along with being a space entrepreneur, I'm a space investor. I've probably done at least a half dozen, maybe a dozen companies now that I've invested in. And I kind of think of them as almost like future moon leadership of tomorrow. I'm a big moon guy, right?
Yep.
I think moon is where the first, in my lifetime at least, where we're going to see the real real bases and even cities kind
And
of
actually,
get
good
set.
point. On the habitat side, what Max Space can be used for is not just creating space in space, but it can also create space on other lands. So whether it's a moon, an asteroid, other planets.
Yep. And I think outside of like, there's the tin cans, and then there's inflatables. You can eventually maybe do, going back to maiden space, make really large structures, but I think that's 2 decades away, still. It's just part of the reason, we gravitated away from that. But yeah, like if you look at, there's a lot of companies that are, Blue Origin, Axiom, Voyager Space, I think Northrop, Boeing, I'm trying to remember who they're partnered with. Gravitics, Fast. There's a lot of these companies, and they're working with NASA for these commercial LEO destinations. And honestly, like, our goal is to work with all of them, because I think that there's a lot more of us to a station than just real estate. And I think us being that kind of real estate provider and just focusing on like, giving you the maximum amount of useful space is
And then
really
you can kind of do whatever you want on the inside. You can kind of build it out however you want for whatever use case. And walk me through a little bit on the business model. What's the business model look like for expandables in terms of the cost to build, the gross margin? Because I remember during our investment committee, that was another thing that was kind of exciting about this play, was that you had one-time revenue with pretty good gross margins, but you also had the recurring revenue in helping to maintain the real estate as well.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of what I want to quote that might go publicly.
Yeah,
I'll say like, look, I think you could have it like 10x, like the current like hard modules right now, cost hundreds of millions of dollars, at least I think the big players are quoting at least like 200 million, 300 million, 400 million, maybe up to 500 million for like one 100 cubic module. We're targeting, a tenth of that. And, maybe we charge a little bit more because we're so cheap, and have a high margin. We want a 50% margin.
sure.
And so I think you can kind of get that there. And then I think there's a few different, um, ways to kind of make money on the maintenance side kind of as well, right? Like, stations you'll need, you make sure they're maintained. The ISS. So I think it cost 100 billion to make, but then Boeing made quite a bit more money maintaining it. I don't know the exact amount. Maybe it's like 2 billion a year or something like that. And it's been a pretty long program, 30 or 40 years. So, I'm not 100% that, but yeah, I think there's kind of several kind of applications there that kind of come through.
Yeah,
And then
it's
going back.
fascinating on the just on the business model. We have another portfolio company that we haven't announced yet, but we just wired the money. It's a tunneling company that tunnels at about 100 times faster than a typical tunneling company and about a tenth of the price. And
Nice.
similar business model where they're building real estate underground, building tunnels and spaces, can do it at a much lower cost. And two business models, they can either build you a tunnel and sell it to you, or they can build a tunnel and then basically sell you the toll for utilizing it, and then they maintain the real estate. And it was just fascinating because VU's portfolio, we have now underground real estate, we have companies, we have a real estate private equity fund, and now we also have a space real estate company. So we're hitting all the
Yeah.
different mediums.
Yeah, no, in many ways that could eventually become a space company. I mean, tunnels is a good, I think tunnels on the moon and Mars are going to be useful. Now, the moon has a lot of tunnels actually already, lava tubes, from meteors kind of crashing on it. And so unknown if they need tunnel diggers right away,
At
but
least you
I
have part of
definitely.
the tunnel might already be built for you. It gives you a good head start. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I definitely like the Boring Company. It's almost like a terrestrial company that could become a space company at some point.
yep.
It sounds like, similar to.
Yeah, same thing there. But yeah, the business
Yeah,
models were fascinatingly similar in build and maintain, and
yeah.
then pay to use. In terms of I guess the other thing about MaxSpace that's interesting is that the ability to scale revenues is also quite unique. Some companies have business models where you're selling like enterprise SaaS for $100 to $1 million. Or if you're a fashion company selling clothes with Max Space, you have the ability of the growth of the revenues are actually pretty interesting because depending on the project, the revenues can be pretty big in range,
Yeah.
depending on the project that you're doing. And so that was another part of our thesis that we liked about this is in terms of being able to grow into significant revenues and become profitable with a relatively small amount of money. Max Space kind of checked all the boxes on the capability of, a lot of startups when they pitch VCs, they're only like everyone has 100 million in 5 years. It's kind of fascinating how every company has that as their 5 year projections. At VU, one of the things I love about our portfolio is I'd say like 90% of our portfolio have significantly higher than $100 million revenue projections, going out 5 to 7 years. But it goes because we're going after such massive market size opportunities. And so Max Space has that where the sizing of per client, per project, it really allows you to kind of scale into some pretty significant numbers, well over, hitting 100 million in 5 years. You can be doing, 10 to 100 times that in the future.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I think that's one of the things that what's one of the things I really like, I don't know if this is the exact same thing you're saying or kind of a flavor about Max Space. So a lot of um, you know, space real estate companies, that I would say, they depend. It's really hard to kind of iterate. So So for instance, they might depend on Starship, right? There's several companies that say, okay, once Starship's online, we're going to build these really large modules inside there. We're going to attach a bunch of them together. And when I think about that, it's like, okay, well, the business is 100% dependent on this technology, which isn't proven, and I do believe Starship will come online, and SpaceX has proven themselves as being able to execute really, really well, but it might take a little bit of time. What I like about MaxSpace is, even as the market's like growing, and it's you kind of need to grow, like, both the product and market at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
For very cheap, we could launch some really cheap smaller modules, like with current systems today, at a really, really kind of like low price. And then once you get very big, once you have Starship, I mean, imagine like 50x on the size of Starship. That's where you get to things that are like stadiums in space for like the
Yep.
cost of like one launch. So it's pretty, I
Agreed.
think it's a flavor of kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, I think that it's more to the point that MaxSpace has because of the nature of the business model, the ability to scale revenues in large chunks. You're able to hit significantly greater than 100 million of revenue in the future because of the nature of the business. Versus like there's other deals that VCs invest in where you're selling like a shirt at a time or a subscription box. Scaling revenues is a lot harder when you're doing businesses like that
Yeah.
than big plays like this. I guess last two questions. I guess if you could talk to the younger Aaron who was just starting Made in Space prior to Max Space, any advice that you kind of would give to your younger self that you've kind of had some enlightenment along the way with now a successful exit, now on to the next potentially even larger opportunity? Any thoughts that you would give to your younger self?
Yeah. I think it's there's a few ways that I think of this same concept. It's one word is speed, another word is like iteration. Um, uh, uh, another word is like Facebook has this mantra, like move fast and break things, or they used to. They kind of went away once they got bigger. Arguably, they need to go back to that.
Yeah.
But I think I first started hearing about this after we started Made in Space. So really early in my career, I think I'd spent too much time, probably not always, but there's times I look back where it's like, okay, I probably spent too much time like thinking or strategizing rather than just moving and testing things. And so this comes out in a few ways. I'll give you like a few examples. So one is, I remember meeting somebody in defense early in the days of Made in Space. We were talking about some of the values of making things in space, and he just kept saying like speed is just so important to national interests. And I was like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Like we really need, like, we need to be able to like move fast at a moment's notice. When I reflect, that also really applies to startups. You really got to be able to like move quick. Not most of your ideas probably won't succeed. Most projects probably won't succeed, but the faster you can move and like test things out, I think the better. And that's why there's a kind of an iteration philosophy, I use, with kind of all my engineering teams. We say skateboard rather than car. I can
Mhm.
maybe show this
I like
graph.
that.
Yeah, but there's this graph where it shows, how you can move like 4 steps and you can get a car done in 4 steps, or you can move 5 steps and get a car done, but you make progress each step. So like in the 4-step one, it's you're building the wheel, then the chassis, and then the structure, and then finally get a car that you can use. But in the 5-step one, which seems slower because it's 5 steps, you actually first you build a skateboard to kind of test the idea of 4 wheels, and moving and getting speed. And so you gain speed on this kind of skateboard concept. And then it turns into a scooter, and then a bicycle. Bicycle, you throw a motor on it, it's a motorcycle. And then the 5th step, you get to the car. But each step, you're moving faster and faster, and proving out more and more kind of concepts.
Hmm.
And I think this is just so important for startups, for engineering projects. It goes back to like why I don't like raising several $billion. Even if let's say we had a NASA transfer, like let's say NASA, but like really any entities transfer like $10 billion to MaxSpace's bank account. I wouldn't then go build like these mega stations, kind of at the end of our roadmap right away. I would still follow the iterative roadmap of build the smaller ones first, kind of prove out the kind of concept, get some people using them, understanding. You think how movies are going to be made in space, but you don't really know until you get movies made in space. So you send up Tom Cruise and James Cameron up there in a really large
Yep.
module and see how they use it. And so I just feel like this is like really, really kind of important. Like probably one of my most viral or successful projects. We kind of launched in 20 minutes. We built a web page in 20 minutes and kind of like launched. It was this company called Magic. We just launched it like overnight, and it ended up getting like 100,000 users on a wait list like within a week or something crazy. And that only was possible just because we moved fast. And I really um, I think Made in Space did a pretty decent job of moving fast with the resources we had. I think once we had our first contract on place, we built and launched a 3D printer in like 11 months, to the space station. And NASA at the time was like, this is the fastest space station mission we've ever seen. Max Space, I think we're going, relatively, quickly launching a habitat up in within 2 years of starting the project. I could probably say I want to go even quicker. I'd love to go in like 12 months. But just that really just urge for speed. And I've heard, this is the case of like larger startups as well. Like I can't remember if it's Stripe, where it might be Stripe, it might be another company, it might be Airbnb. Maybe it's Patrick Collison. I can't recall. So I'm misquoting. Patrick, don't yell at me. But where he goes around the team and just he makes sure that two things are happening each team that he goes to. It's like one, decisions are being made, and then two, they're moving as fast as they can. And he's often sends around the timeline of the iPod, not the iPhone, yeah, the iPods, and how they like had like the iPods, their first MP3 player, from like project to like producing millions of them in users' hands like in 11 months. And
Yeah.
for hardware, that's insane, right? And then Apple, they weren't the behemoth they are today. Like they were actually pretty resource constrained at the time, right? The iPod actually, helped save them from a product standpoint. And so I really think, and that often just falls on the founder. The founder just needs to be pressing for like max speed. I think one of the things, I know Elon's getting a lot of hate, but right now, but I think one of the things he's great at is manufacturing speed, manufacturing like deadlines. The reason I think he picks these crazy deadlines that everybody says, hey, you're not going to make it. It's because like, shoot, man, I gotta get my team, like going fast. Because look, with engineering, you could always go twice as long or 3 times as long or 4 times as
For
long and make 10% better, 20% better. The hard thing is figuring out what do you need to cut to get the early iteration out that you can get it to users' hands, that you can see if there's anything useful here. So it's a really
Yeah, I think
long-winded.
it's a good point about it's by putting in strong targets, it helps also motivate people to do it faster. You might not end up hitting that milestone, but you're probably going to get there faster than if you didn't have it that early.
Yep.
And it also helps you start thinking about all the things that you need to get done sooner to make it happen. But if you don't put those tighter timelines, things can take a lot longer, cost a lot more. And the whole thing is, how do you beat that? And so
Exactly.
I'm with you on the strategy of that. No, thank you so much for sharing it. It's a really exciting journey that you've undergone now with MaxSpace, and we're excited to be there to support you, just like we with MaxSpace, and looking for what looks like a very much an even larger opportunity with MaxSpace, and excited to kind of continue to support you in the journey to come, as well as to your point about space companies working together. There's a lot of collaboration already between our portfolio companies in space tech, and I think that is a beautiful part of the industry, is that there's a lot more partnerships than direct competition in the mentality that people have. And there's just so much to build for this, really building kind of the next industrial revolution of space that's happening right now. You need more people building other things, not building the same things.
Yeah.
And it's really exciting time right now for the next 5 to 10 years. I think we're still, internally, even though we have our 10 space portfolio companies, most of the world, I think, is still pretty oblivious to just how advanced the space industry has become, and where it's just going to be going over the next 5 or 10 years. So, and you're at the helm of really helping to build the future of really the entire space industry. Will likely be built on the backs on top of Max Space, because you got to build it somewhere, and you can build it inside of Max Space. So, so thank you very much, Aaron, for doing this, and looking forward to working with you and building the company as we go.
Yeah, Sky, thank you guys. You guys have been great, and glad to have you on board, and both Maiden Space and now Max Space. And I hope to turn this into now we got you guys in early, and so hope to turn it into a big success in 10 years.
Agreed.
That's how I look at companies. What do you want to spend 10 years doing at least?
I'm excited to hopefully back you 10 years from now for your third company that you're going to do. So
one thing I think they say they need to start maybe changing VC cycles from 10 years to 20, because the last 10 years is where you really, I think, see the growth. I mean, if you look at Google, Amazon, Tesla, SpaceX, like
yep.
the first 10 years, like great, you can get, I think they all had like 1,000x returns, but then the next 10,000, I think, was in the following 10 years. Like when you can really,
yeah, it was there are a handful of new venture funds that now have 15-year timelines instead of the 10-year fund. And so, yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. I think it's fascinating as venture as a category continues to evolve, because we're still so infant in the time of VC, modern day VC, starting in like the late 60s, early 70s. Like Kleiner was founded in 1972, at the same time as Sequoia. The grandfathers are still alive that made the venture capital industry. And so as you see how the venture capital asset class is also innovating itself from VU's model, VU's model is very innovative in being able to source and evaluate more deal flow than pretty much every other venture fund in history, by having such a large 70-person investment team. But to your point about how it'll continue to evolve, where the ability for founders to execute on even bigger visions, in terms of capital efficiency continuing to improve, where you can do more with less and achieve more faster. It will be fascinating to see how both sides of the spectrum of venture continue to expand, from more micro funds, more mega billion-dollar funds, but also this aspect of the time horizon that you're bringing up, where it enables founders to think even broader, where they don't have to just focus on exiting in 3 to 5 years. They can focus on exiting in 10, 15 years. And they have capital partners that are going to be patient and are also having the capital that are saying, okay, you hit these milestones over the next 7 to 10 years, we're going to continue to provide the capital. So you're not going to be capital constrained in a way that founders were before. You can even have the same investor that can live with you for the next decade plus, to build really big visions, going after even bigger market sizes that were humanly possible in the past. So I think we have a really exciting future ahead.
Yeah, I agree. And I think maybe even SpaceX kind of helped paint a little bit of a picture. So they do like internal, like secondary rounds that go with other rounds like twice a year or something.
Yep.
So I think you could get like, you could like extend out the VC cycle if we get like a more consistent, secondary strategy for both the early investors and the early employees, because I think that pressure is what leads to an exit at year 8 or year 10, whether it's rushing out an IPO, which sometimes can be good, worked out for Google, but
it's an interesting incentive alignment, because it really does say we're going to support you to build bigger and longer for the right opportunities.
That's right. Awesome. Well,
cool.
This guy, all right, so we're going to be together for 20 years, but we'll have to figure out a way to make sure we get the ROI for everybody.
But you and I are both also focusing on longevity in the background too. So hopefully we'll also look like this 20 years from now too. Thank you so much, Aaron.
I look better than I did. I looked better than I did at the peak of Maiden Space. I was like 60 pounds heavier, and I'm one of those, when I gain weight, I look a lot older. So it was that first 3D printer mission. I ate too many late night pizzas and Taco Bell.
I'm definitely looking forward to the next 20 years with building this, and what you will do beyond even Max Space. So I'm looking forward to the long-term relationship, and excited VU can be there to support you in that. So thanks so much.
All right. Keep up the good work.
Cool. Cheers, Aaron.